So how exactly does one single piece of paper basically dictate the price of your fuel in Tokyo, your groceries in London, or, well, the value of your savings sitting right at home? Today, we're diving into this explainer to look at the massive, kinda invisible architecture of the global economy. We're going to see how the US dollar became the undisputed, absolute heavyweight champion of international finance. It's honestly a wild story about economic strategy, perfect historical timing, and the crazy mechanics that literally keep our modern world turning.
Just think about a normal morning routine for a second. You might wake up in India, check a smartphone that was put together in China, running on these highly specialized microchips from Taiwan, and the whole thing was manufactured and shipped using oil from the Middle East, right? We're talking wildly different borders, totally different languages, entirely different governments. But behind all of that, silently making every single one of those cross-border transactions possible, is the US dollar. It's basically the universal translator for global trade.
Which, brings us to the big question here. How on earth did we actually get here? Why does the entire world instinctively trust the dollar to underwrite trillions, literally trillions, in daily trade? And what would happen if that trust just vanished tomorrow? To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this, we've actually got to rewind a bit. Because believe it or not, the global economy didn't always run on the greenback.
So before World War II, the financial king wasn't the dollar at all. It was the British pound. The British Empire had this massive global reach, making its currency the absolute go-to for international trade. But two devastating world wars completely flipped the board. Europe's infrastructure was practically destroyed, and major governments were just drowning in wartime debt. But across the Atlantic, the United States emerged with booming factories, an untouched domestic economy, and, this is absolutely crucial, it held the vast majority of the world's physical gold reserves. The stage was perfectly set for something completely new.
44. That is a number to remember. It's the exact number of allied nations whose leaders packed into the small town of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, back in the summer of 1944. They were staring down a totally unprecedented crisis. How do you rebuild a shattered global economy from the ground up and make sure a financial collapse of that scale literally never happens again? Well, the solution they hammered out in that room ended up rewriting modern history.
They came up with the Bretton Woods Agreement. Instead of everyone relying on their own kind of shaky currencies or trying to manage this chaotic web of exchange rates, these 44 nations agreed to peg their money directly to the US dollar. And the catch that actually made it work, the US guaranteed that the dollar itself was firmly backed by physical gold at exactly $35 an ounce. So suddenly, you didn't need to ship heavy gold bars across the ocean anymore. You just needed dollars. Almost overnight, global trade was unlocked, and the dollar stepped right into the dead center of global finance.
Okay, so the dollar officially dethroned the pound and locked itself to gold, but its absolute, unbreakable dominance, that was actually secured decades later with a completely different commodity. By the 1970s, the whole gold standard thing had essentially run its course, but rather than losing its grip, there was this massive strategic pivot that cemented the dollar's power on the world stage for good.
The US struck some landmark agreements with major oil-producing nations, and the deal was simple but genius. Oil, the literal lifeblood of the modern world, would be sold exclusively in US dollars. Think about the massive scale of that trap for a second. If Japan needs to keep its city lights on, they need dollars. If India or Brazil wants to fuel their infrastructure, they need dollars. It created this inescapable, basically infinite global demand. The dollar wasn't just a currency anymore. It became the mandatory entry ticket you needed just to participate in the modern economy. Now, you've really got to wonder, why don't countries just, opt out? Why not build a different system? Well, it ultimately boils down to unshakable trust and unmatched liquidity. The US boasts the deepest, most transparent financial markets on the planet. Governments and huge investors know for a fact they can park billions in US Treasury bonds and then pull those funds out at a moment's notice, totally seamlessly, without completely crashing the value of the asset.
Think of it like the ultimate financial umbrella. When geopolitical storms hit, or when economic uncertainty suddenly spikes, central banks don't run away from the dollar, they run straight under its protection. Today, central banks all over the world hoard US dollars as their primary emergency reserves. In the super volatile world of global finance, that kind of universally accepted trust, backed by the sheer size of the US economy, is honestly more valuable than gold itself.
So why does all of this actually matter to you? Because even if you've never set foot in the United States, the dollar's strength is quietly dictating your daily life. When the dollar surges globally, your local currency usually weakens by comparison. Suddenly, your imported groceries cost more. Fuel prices spike at your local pump. tech gadgets get pricier, and local inflation creeps up because businesses just pass those higher costs right onto you. It's this invisible force quietly pulling the strings on your grocery bill, your investments, and your future purchasing power.
But the tectonic plates of global finance are definitely starting to shift a bit. We're seeing a really concerted, strategic effort by several nations to reduce this heavy dependence. They're actively engineering alternative payment systems to bypass U.S. financial networks, aggressively pushing to settle trade directly in their own local currencies, and quietly hoarding massive new gold reserves to diversify their wealth. But look, replacing the dollar, that is a monumental task. A true global reserve currency takes rock-solid institutional stability, worldwide acceptance, and literally decades of built-up trust. You just can't create that overnight.
For now, the dollar definitely retains its crown. But history leaves us with one glaringly obvious lesson about power. No empire lasts forever, and no currency stays on top forever. The story of the greenback isn't just some boring lesson in American economics. It's practically the underlying source code of the modern world. It shapes global trade, geopolitical power, and domestic politics on literally every single continent.
So the next time you tap your phone to buy something from overseas, or check your investment portfolio, or even just watch the price tick up at the gas pump, ask yourself, is the sovereign greenback going to maintain its iron grip on the world for another century? Or are we, right now, living through the slow, quiet dawn of a completely new financial era? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep looking out for those invisible forces shaping our world.